Well, Anita, we'll start the discussion with you today. Tell us a little bit about the Inflexion Podcast and why you guys created that.
So I'm going to take you and tell you a little bit about the backstory of Inflexion Point Podcast. And it really started, as so many of these things have started, with the murder of George Floyd.
Okay.
So that was an incident that rocked the world. To me, it was on the same level when you think back on when Trayvon Martin was murdered and how that impacted the entire world. And it was the same thing with George Floyd. And my journey into creating Inflexion Point Podcast began with a conversation in my home.
Okay.
And it was shortly after the murder occurred, and it was maybe, I want to say like maybe 5 days or so after the murder occurred. And my 2 daughters and a nephew were preparing to go out for a Black Lives Matter protest in the city of Pittsburgh. And I walked into the room where my younger daughter was sitting, and she had just given birth to her first child, Cairo. He was born in March, and George Floyd was murdered in May. And so we're having this conversation as they're going out to prepare to go out to march. And during the course of that conversation, we came to realize that in our family, we represented 3 generations of protesting. My mother was an activist, and I can remember her getting geared up to go out and protest when I was younger. And then I had my protesting days primarily when I was in college, during my college years. And now I'm sitting here having a conversation with my 2 daughters, and they're preparing to go out and march.
Wow.
And it occurred to us, number one, this is 3 generations. Number 2, we're protesting for the same exact thing. And that thing is the birthright to freely and peacefully exist in the skin in which we were born.
Wow.
No matter what that skin looks like. And so my daughter's attention now turns to the baby because he's lying next to her as she's talking. And she says, do you think Cairo will have to protest in his lifetime? And that just really, really hit me, because then that would make 4 generations in our family alone of protesting for the same exact thing. And so that's what prompted all of the work and eventually it led to this. And so that Cairo question, will Cairo have to protest in his lifetime for the birthright to freely and peacefully exist in the skin in which he was born? That question just really began to trouble my heart, right? And so I just started thinking, and things just started to happen. The first thing that happened was that I wrote a book. And I wrote a book called Cultivating Change from the Inside Out, The Power of Being Human. And the purpose of that book, it's kind of like a guide to understanding who you are as a human being, and then understanding that who you are as a human being filters out into the world and it impacts other people. So understanding your thoughts, your ideas, your beliefs, and all of that in your inside, but then recognizing how does that show up in my words, my actions, and my behaviors? Because that's when you're now impacting the world. You're impacting other people around you. And if you harbor certain types of certain mindset or beliefs and all of that, it's going to show up. Eventually, it might show up and impact my grandson's life. So that was the first thing I did, was wrote a book. Then I started thinking about this idea of having a podcast. And so having a podcast grew out of the book. So the book became the foundation for the podcast. And what the book helped me to do was to really frame all of that up within the context of creating an activism through coaching model. My business, my profession is personal transformation. I'm a personal transformation expert. And what that, in normal terms, what that means is I'm a life coach. And I coach people on understanding 3 things. Number 1, where I am in my life, where I really am in my life. Number 2, where I really want to be in my life. And then number 3, understanding that there's a gap in between. And people like me step into that gap with you to help you ask the right questions, to probe within yourself, to really get a sense of who am I? And if I want to be over there, how do I get there? What is that pathway? What are those things I have to do? What are those things about me that have to change in order for me to be able to do that? So I created this activism through coaching model, essentially, and then out of that came the podcast.
Okay.
And so the podcast was really like a culmination of all of that.